you mind if we take our masks down? Yeah, it might be a little easier. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. I'm going to, before we talk a little bit about the project behind us, see, I'm very professional. I wrote out questions. If you ever come to the animation festival and I do interviews, it's very unprofessional. So I stepped it up just for tonight. With that, so we're going to talk a little bit about your background for people who might not be familiar with Yaloo's work and previous work and whatnot, and just talk about process and whatnot. We're going to have Q&A after. Did we ever? Well, whatever. If you feel like asking questions, you can. Preferably after we stop speaking. Not in the middle. So first of all, I mean, it was a little weird for me when I got asked to be part of this because I'm coming from the fully animation world, but I recognized immediately we had something in common through the School of Art Institute in Chicago and a professor there, Chris Sullivan, who I know as an animation filmmaker. But your work, you dabble with animation, with mapping, video art, installations. I'm just wondering, to go back, what sort of came first for you? What got you in the door of art?
That's a difficult question. But I guess in terms of what I'm doing now, being trained at Fukuoka Art Institute and being part of the Department of Film, Video, and Media and Animation was really shaped my current practice. Because the department treats everything that's like moving image. Right. So that's where I started.
Can everybody hear?
Yeah.
No? Wait, so we have to project.
Right. Yellow. That's my reason. Yeah, that's the answer.
Well, I just wondered where did you study in Korea first and then go to the Art Institute?
Okay. So for higher education and professional art education, I studied in North America at the School of the Art Institute.
Okay. And what was it about the Art Institute that made you want to travel quite a ways?
I got scholarship. As simple as that.
All right.
But yeah, I was very discontent with the higher educations in South Korea. I guess as other East Asian kids around my age, especially.
And what led you to want to work with installations as opposed to making animation films in a for a cinema audience?
Right. I guess that's also just me being a product of Fukuoka Art Institute. The school really pushed students to be interdisciplinary as possible, and you don't really you don't have to be part of the department. Right. Though I took film, video, and media department as my home ground, and then branched out. But still, I wanted to experiment moving images in different ways, and I got really good support from the peers and the faculty members back then. So yeah.
Do you think there's a difference in how a viewer would takes your work in a space like this, let's say, versus a cinema?
Oh yeah, very different.
How so?
Because in cinema, you are supposed to forget your body and immerse yourself to the screen. But if the work is presented in a space, you're highly aware of your body and you're interacting with the work in a very different way. But yeah, so I think that immersive experience is very different, and I enjoy it.
Now, right, as we've been talking about, I've been working on a book about collage animation. So collage, that's all I see right now are collage images. And certainly your work, when I first saw it, I thought, yeah, that's going on here. So maybe you could talk about collage and what your attraction to that approach of sort of appropriating other images, putting them into a new context.
When I was putting together my portfolio in high school, I did more of collages with little objects and foods instead of drawing and painting. And I really feel like I didn't really love that much from it. I'm just using like a different technology to do the same thing. So yeah, that's where I started. And then I pretty much treat the video in like the same way. I use all the layers of video as like a sculptural object and then just move them around in timeline. And when I put up installation, and then I start introducing physical space.
And where does the inspiration for the images you used? You know, I've read grocery stores, K-pop bands.
I get just like everything that I see on the web. I mean, it sounds very broad, but I think that just happens to a lot of people. I constantly screenshots and then grab images and then just gather all of them. But I feel like now I have like a better like a system that I kind of like I have a way to sort all the imageries in like a certain order and start making like a stories with my collection.
And in some of the work I saw, there's some overlap in some themes, you know, dealing with nature, environment, I think the future of humanity in some ways, but also some images from Korea, like the seaweed or ginseng. You kind of address the issue of East, so-called East versus West culture and whatnot. Where did that sort of interest, like especially in your own country and the symbols from that country, was that something that intrigued you always, or did it take going to the West to?
I think like both really. Being educated in U.S. really pushed me to think, you know, like wherever you go, once you're out of your own hometown, like people ask where you're from, and you're always thinking of the question, and that question really defines you. So if I'm going to be defined by that question, it's better to be aware. Because whatever I do, people will see it that way anyway. So I try to get have more active control.
Right. So I have to look at the sheet. I was trying to be professional. I guess that was another question I wanted to know. Just the process. I'm used to it with animators, knowing how long it can take, but this strikes me as such a big endeavor, putting installations together. Like, how long is the process from the concept to the first public presentation? That's one part. And to go back, when you're starting a project, like, do you have an idea in mind to begin with, or does an image you found maybe inspire something, or does it change?
I think really all of it. Usually it takes, I think since like things takes longer as I grow older. I don't know if it's like right way to put it. Because before, like I used to just make things like overnight and I was content. But now, like things takes like a few months. The project that I'm starting to work now, it's just in a like research phase. That even just to get to the funding, it took like 2 years. So things are definitely taking longer as I am being more like mature as an artist, I think.
Right. Well, I think in general the length of the project.
Yeah, so I guess I could compare with like a traditional, more like traditional like animator, because like those really like takes time to create. Like if you're like drawing like on paper, like there's like a certain amount of time you have to spend. But I guess how I make moving images is a little different. So I guess big part of it is for me to learn new technology and like watching a lot of tutorials and follow along, and starting with like an example, I really have to learn how to make it into my own, and also trying to find out like the DIY pipeline, because once you're using like a high tech, like it's really hard to do everything on your own, but there's a beauty into it. And it's more about like navigating how to make the works that it's like genuinely yours, and just working with like available means, find the right people to work with or teach.
And in terms of funding, in Korea, is there adequate support for
Yeah, for now it's really so we'll see with like the president.
Right. You've done presentations all over the world, and I wonder how much those experiences start impacting your work as well.
Yeah, that really impacted me a lot. Because in our school, because I was studying in a very like a small tight bubble,
Right.
so-called like contemporary art. And then once I left school, I was going to a lot of like different places where they don't care about contemporary art, or they don't know what's contemporary art, or like the meaning or like of contemporary art is very different by different regions. So I learned a lot, and I learned about how to interact with people who's not an artist in a professional setting. So yeah, so I think those really helped me to be more like a human person. And I think that kind of helps too in that create work.
It's a bit like the animation world, because everybody, for the most part, thinks animation is just this silly thing for kids. And there's this whole world of artistic, experimental animation. But we keep fighting that battle. I want to talk, we were talking about a little bit about this before, which I just found, again, I'm maybe being selfish coming out of this collage mode. We're just, living in this world just saturated with images. Like every day, everything we're doing is mediated now, to the point where I don't know if we see anything anymore. We got our phones and just everything. And I have kids, so maybe I'm sounding more frustrated than I should be, trying to get them off their phones. But I wonder too, as a visual artist, how you find an audience, how you combat or separate yourself in this world where it's just, we're like in Plato's cave, just staring at the shadows of things, not the things themselves anymore.
I feel like it's really exciting time for artists like me, artists who work with moving image, because there are like so many screens like everywhere. It could be a cell phone to like a lot of media platforms everywhere in the city, wherever you go, or like. But then also it's frustrating because it's not like you could put your work out there like any screen.
Right.
So it's a big battle of how to distribute work, or how to put certain type of imageries or like work in like certain places. So you have to definitely work with other people, and also you have to definitely work with community that supports your work. Also, you really have to be aware of what you're doing.
There was one project that kept sticking with me that I saw that I forget the context of it, but it was in a building where it had some of your mapping, I guess. You see people standing by the elevator. I don't know if it's an office building or where it was. But how does a project like that come about? And if it's in a space where it's not really people there for an artistic experience, how can that be upsetting?
Well, so
if it's just background,
Yeah, well, I guess that I really grew out from it when I was doing residency in a lot of community settings, because those places, they don't really care what you're doing.
Right.
But like if there's like something colorful, like sometimes they're not people. But then I think it's it really like you don't know when you could find somebody who's touched by your work. That happens sometimes, and it's really precious. So like I just wait for those moments.
That's probably more valuable in some way, because if you're in a gallery setting, you kind of preaching to the converted to some degree. Whereas in a space like an office building, maybe you will catch one person.
Yeah, sometimes that happens, and it's really nice. But it's not like your work is like more appreciated than things like a lot of people just. I heard there's like a statistic for video art. Like people don't look at usually people stay for 60 to 90 seconds for video works. So, even the informed people, they don't have the patience.
Well, that's what I wondered, back to that comparison with the cinema and being in a setting like this. That in a cinema, I mean, people physically have to stay, but I think mentally probably check out quite often. But here, it's maybe more physical. They take a bit in and move on our way.
It's a very different kind of experience.
Now, before we just wrap up talking about this project, I know you're going into VR. That's an interest. I'm wondering what leads you to VR, and what's the appeal for that? Because we show VR at the Animation Festival every year, and I was very reluctant about it at first. There's something I just find the world is closing in even more, and it's a very isolating experience at times.
It is, yeah. So I'm very interested in learning to create immersive experience, and that's where when I started projection mapping too. I really like giving the shape to screens and having a sculptural quality to the moving image, and I like that people could walk around it and touch the screen even. So for me, experimenting with AR or VR was very natural, and I actually I was lucky enough to start from a very beginning of the second wave. But then yes, it's technology is so difficult, and it says it's immersive, but you really need really good gears and good engineer to optimize the experience. So I haven't been able to do it well, but I feel as an independent visual artist, I kind of feel I should just keep trying, because if I don't try, and if people like me don't try, only the big companies or engineer-minded studio will set up the standards of your experience, and I don't think that's too great. There should be weird, wacky people keep participating. So we have more rooms for different type of experience.
Good, weird, wacky people.
Yes.
Because the world's filled with bad, wacky people right now. Do you want to go into what that project is at all?
So I have a new piece called Pickle City. I'm currently playing it in Floriade in the Netherlands. It's about an underwater city so I have this speculative scenario where the human decides to go deep in the sea as part of terraforming project. So instead of going to the Mars, it's easier or more economic to go into the big water. And I created the city based on some of the key ancient artifacts of Korean history. So I have a 4-minute animation out, and based on that animation, I'm trying to make a VR experience. So I'm still developing, and currently I'm looking for people to give me devices, professional people in the different field. Hopefully I'll premiere it in October.
And now, what's behind us here?
Okay, so this piece is called Homophobia Lab. It's one of my first projects working in a unit. So I've been closely working with a conceptual artist, Kim, and she and I started to build this worldview of this posthuman who voluntarily engineered their body into a form that's photosynthesized. So they live in the water and they have their culture. And so the video in the back, it explains kind of a theoretical concept behind how Homo sapiens decides to move on to Homo Paulinella. And I have a book in the back. It's more a story based. There's 3 generations of women. So grandma is the last Homo sapiens, and then the granddaughter is the first generations of Homo Paulinella. And it's like a journal structure, so it's fun to read. And it was cool because we got the funding for this exhibition. We were able to translate it into English. So we have the English version for that.
And what was your origin point for this idea? You get seaweed in here, which is also kind of a common
So I've
image.
been working with seaweed as a motif for many years without really realizing. One of my first project was to create a sculpture garden with video projections with like some like actual sculptures, and it's supposed to be like a seaweed pond. And it was just like a very simple idea. I missed my mom's seaweed soup, so I just decided to make an installation. And that was like more than 10 years ago. And then in 2019, I was doing a residency in a small port city called Mojiko in Japan. And there, I was asked to observe a local ceremony in Lunar New Year where they go down the shore to harvest the seaweed of the year to symbolize a good harvest and good fortune. So that I realized seaweed has like a deeper meaning, and its cultural significance in East Asia. With that, I was working with local artists to create a happening, and that was super fun. And then a few months later, I was part of an exhibition and residency called Future Hacking Food. That exhibition was interesting and a big learning experience for me because I was working closely with the artists with engineering background. And then so I started thinking of all the motifs that I have in more a research-based and scientific way. And so the seaweed, without me really noticing, expanded into a different field. So that really was, it's been very organic.
And the most intellectual question of the evening, Yaloo. Where does that come from? Does it mean anything? And in a number of your projects, you work that into the title as well.
I did, yeah. So
Yaloo World, like Disney World.
Very insightful question. So when I moved
That's why they pay me the big dollars.
When I moved to US, it was very refreshing for me to be asked what name I go by. I was never asked the question before in Korea. So I thought that was funny, so I kept changing name every semester. And then when I was using Yaloo, actually it was Chris Sullivan told me, Yaloo, you gotta stop changing your name. Nobody will remember you. So I was like, okay. So from that, I kept the name. And I was keep looking for the name that's non-referential. So I was just being ambitious, a little kid, Freddy kid. I was I want this name. I'm the only one who use this name, or when people think of one sound, I want to be remembered that way. But of course, there's no sound they really. There's a few things called Yaloo. I won't say now, but.
And the use of the name in some of your works?
Yeah. Well, that's also pretty Western, a lot of Western things, people.
That's why I brought up Disney.
Yeah, Disney. Or even all the companies, it was very new, all the companies named after their last names of the CEO, right? I thought that was kind of cool, because that's something I didn't know before. So I was always sure, I'm going to be super. I'll call everything Pretty simple. Yeah, very difficult period.
Had to lighten it up. I think that was all I had. Does anybody want to ask some questions?
I just forgot to, me or? So I just forgot to mention about the thank message to the DARC, Digital Art Resources Center. We are partnering with them. And Laura helped us installing this really good work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know that you just had an opening. No, you will have an opening at the FACT in Liverpool soon. Could you tell us more about?
Yeah, that's also seaweed related.
A lot of seaweed.
Yeah, a lot of seaweed. So I will have a two-person show in July in FACT Liverpool, and then it's called Birthday Garden, and then I'll have a seaweed-themed birthday garden that's on the water. So actually, I will have a pool of water and seaweed guardians in water capsules, and we have a giant mask and project, and then I'll have a series writing project in
One other thing I wanted to ask, in the animation community, it can be quite small, and everybody kind of knows each other, especially on the non-industry side. When you're working kind of different tools and forms, I mean, is it the same in the installation or contemporary art world?
That's actually a really good question. Well, so yes, I feel like each community is very tight. And then I think especially English-speaking community is like super tight and small. Like wherever you go, like there can be kind of see like a similar.
Yeah.
So it was interesting for me to start like hanging out with media artists with engineering background because they have their own thing. And then because I didn't have their language, it was really hard to be part of it first. So yeah, I'm learning to navigate like different disciplines. So it's been pretty difficult, but then once I learn how to talk to and communicate with other disciplines, it's very fun. I learn a lot because like each discourse is like have their own thing going on,
right.
Different history, different conversation. And I guess I'm coming more from the visual art. So a lot of the time it's really, it takes time. It's like a really big, like steep learning curve.
Right. Is it a very competitive world too?
Yeah. Very competitive. And it's filtered.
It's interesting too. I mean, I've seen other examples where you are using animation quite often, but you're not really part of the animation community at all.
True. I think it was probably like it was a little bit like traumatic being in film and video media like department because there was always like a hardcore animation game, and I couldn't even say like I was animating or like I'm an animator because for them it's wrong.
Right. Yeah.
So it's very refreshing to talk to you, and also like, but I have a lot of good friends who's still like a big part of like animation. So, yeah.
Animation's really, it gets, misinterpreted by the mass audiences, but then contemporary art doesn't really take it serious either. And if anybody watches the Oscars, it's clear they don't take animation serious at all. Chris Rock wasn't the only person who got slapped in the face this year. When they gave out the animation feature, they had 3 actresses who had played Disney princesses in past films come out and talk about how animation's for
Korean media exploring exhibition with Yaloo.
kids. La la la. Just setting everything back 50 years. I think we covered a lot, not enough. Oh, yeah, we'll go to questions now.
What about sound? I don't see security sound here in your work.
So it's muted now, but I have a beautiful sound design. So please just stick around. And I worked with a musician called, her name is Yetsby, and she's South Korean based, and she's a great producer. And yeah, it's been really fun working with her. So I've been working with her for like multiple projects. This was actually the first project.
How involved are you with that aspect of it? Like in animation, I know some animators really know what they want. Some just don't really have an idea, like a musician.
I really think that depends on who I work with. Because with her, I talked to her from the beginning stage, but she really gets what I want.
Right.
But I just share like a overall feeling and storyboard, and then I give her a playlist of what I think of.
Okay.
But she always directs every time. She fits. She's very precise, and usually like I just like everything she does, so it's really nice. But sometimes I have to be really, but usually if that's going to be the case, I will be working.
Right. Anyone else? Comment, anecdote?
So as you move more towards VR and engineering type stuff, do you think you would ever be interested in having like haptic experiences where like you have this suit that like interacts with the VR, so you can have like actually touch stuff and like feel like if you bump into things?
I'm considering it. I'm trying to be I'm trying to be very conservative when I move on to higher more advanced technology, because I always root myself in visual art, and I think it's really important to create a critical and beautiful, like not just conventional way, but like the interesting visual language that should come first for me. So I'm gonna be super conservative. I'm just like trying to push myself to use VR because I just feel like there's just not many people trying different things. So yeah, I would eventually go there, but I'm gonna be super slow. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just curious, and this ties into maybe the question or what you were discussing about animation and the industry of like the mainstream industry versus the art world, but like culturally, where in Korea compared to maybe Canada or the other places you've been, do you see difference in the cultural value for art? Or how is it in Korea with the society supporting more experimental work like yours? Or
I think for animation it's really different. Like I'm not expert, but Korea has like a really big manga and webtoon industry and readers. But I guess within that genre they have their own experimentation going on. But I feel like they could really use the word of experimental animation that I'm more used to. I just don't know how to get to them yet. But I'm like keep looking, yeah. Because they're very like super commercial. Like, the animation in Korea is very commercial.
Every year we get hundreds of films from Korean schools, and you see every once in a while pretty unusual, interesting film. I found that a lot of the, there's obviously the students who just want to go the Pixar type route, but there's also some schools where they're clearly, I could see they've watched National Film Board of Canada animation, and visually they're replicating it quite well. But beyond that, with the idea, they don't have anything to say quite often. Like don't feel they've experienced anything.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to actually see those and study them, because there are a lot of government-funded webtoon schools now. Because it's like one of the easy ways to be rich as a culture producer. So there's actually a lot of after schooling and like a training programs, but they only teach like in a certain way. Like these days, well, I'm not expert, but from what I see, like they are trying to draw like webtoons, like closer to like a traditional, conventional like storyboard, so they could be easily sold to like Netflix or platforms like that. So that's pretty interesting, but I feel like a lot of the times the contents are like the same.
Yeah. But it's a problem here too. Canadian animation schools. It's not so good.
Okay, so I do have the industrial design background. And then you kind of mentioned about the city, developing a city under the oceans. Not so familiar with animation and this kind of art kind of installation. And then have you thought about any technical support or underlying mechanism to develop that kind of the city under the ocean? Because developing city under the ocean was one of the famous kind of topics for industrial designers to develop that kind of the cities by putting a lot of the rational, logical implementation of the technological support. For example, how people breathe, where the air comes from, and how people can live in under this ocean. So based on those kind of technological support, industrial designers and engineers and scientists actually work together to get them some shapes and forms and architecture, all those kind of under the ocean things. So I'm just wondering, have you considered those kinds of technical support when you design or making this kind of under the ocean, 3D under the ocean animation?
Oh, thanks for the question. That's a great question. So yes, I do look at a lot of speculative design studios and design like speculative artworks, and I am trying to do something because I'm not a designer. I root myself in the visual art, so I'm trying to make a distinction. So that's why I started looking at a lot of traditional artifacts and then the folk cultures and folk knowledge. So I'm like relying on like the mystical imaginations and then but yeah, I am actually I've been in research of like architecture studios actually too, because I don't want to be like just like imagination, pure imagination. I should root in some like the current technology to make it more like accessible. But I don't want it to be like, okay, this is like, I don't want my piece to be like, okay, this is going to like architecture.
Kind of combinations between imagination.
Right, like somewhere in between, because I feel like that's where I could be actually excel at, and also I could differentiate my work from other, because there has been a lot of underwater projects, I'm aware, so yeah, I'm trying to be different. And also that's why, so one of my key motif is 백제 궁도대학로. It's one of like ancient incense chamber from few dynasties back in Korean Peninsula. And it's like this size, and it's a beautiful artifact from one of the like old temples they just excavated not too long ago. And then it depicts the mystical, like human, non-human ecosystem. And it's based on Buddhism, like Taoism, and like Confucianism. So I feel like that really is like, for me, it's like one of the oldest like the sci-fi project they ever did, and it's like beautiful. So I'm trying to like based on like that, and then do my own way of sci-fi project. But yeah, so that's why I wanted to apply for a budget so I could actually like work with professionals from the other industry or other field to make it so it's just not like, okay, this is like all coming from my head. Like you should actually based on something, but I am trying to like balance in a way that's like different from others. Yeah.
Thanks.
That's really
Anyone else?
Just a quick question about your art practice with digital art and new technology versus traditional fine art. Because I saw in your book you have some, they look like watercolors. And are you firmly into the digital world now, or is everything on the table for your practice?
Actually, the watercolors are from the writer, Incheon. All the 3D elements are done by me. And I guess I kind of draw. But not so much. But I use VR to sculpt, and it's very intuitive. It's like drawing with pencil, but just you're drawing with the console. So I like being intuitive, and I like being as like organic as possible. So I always find a way to do so.
Last thing I wanted to ask, just speaking of intuitive, how rigidly planned is each project, or do you allow for some improvisation or something midpoint take you in a different direction?
That's a good question, because it used to be like pure improvisation, but now I can't work alone because the project gets bigger.
Right.
So I have to plan, and it's really so I'm learning a lot, because once you have other people like working with you, like you really have to have a PDF for every stage, for every meeting.
And you're more mature now, so.
Yeah.
All right, I think we'll end there. Thank you all for coming.